Old Grognard says, let's look at how hull points work in AD&D 2nd Edition's Spelljammer setting. In a vehicle combat system like the one Spelljammer has for ship-to-ship combat, the expectations for how vehicle damage works are going to be different than the expectations we might have for damage in a creature-to-creature combat system. For example, a space galleon is not going to take damage from some of the things that would injure a character. A lot of this is because a space galleon is big and it's made out of thick wood. It's an inanimate object with more in common with a building or a really big piece of furniture than it has with a living being. So if it's hit by an arrow, we would expect the arrow to, at most, just stick in the side and not really do much to the structure of the ship. Similarly, if someone decides to climb up the side of the ship with tools like boarding axes, for example, the damage is going to be superficial and in game terms probably not worth tracking. Hull points, therefore, are the system the rules use to model these expectations. So mechanically, hull points are like hit points, but bigger. Ships initially have hull points equal to their tonnage. So if you have a 40-ton vessel like our space galleon from earlier, it will have 40 hull points. When a ship takes meaningful damage, it loses hull points. So again, in that sense, they're like hit points, only bigger. Taking damage from crashing, ramming, or being hit by a large weapon like a catapult or a cannon are all fairly straightforward, at least as far as the damage mechanics are concerned. That's because these things all inflict damage measured in hull points, so if you have the space galleon from earlier with 40 hull points, and it's hit by a cannonball for 3 hull points, it now has 37 hull points. Again, it's pretty straightforward. Now, things like spells, magic items, handheld weapons, and monsters also have the potential to cause a ship to lose hull points. The general rule of thumb for converting hit point damage over to hull point damage is that for every whole 10 points of damage an attack inflicts, the ship will lose 1 hull point. For example, a lightning bolt that inflicts 25 points of damage will do 2 hull points to a ship. An ankylosaurus striking a ship with its tail would do 1 hull point if it inflicted 10 or more points of damage, but wouldn't do any hull damage if it rolled 9 points of damage or less. If damage is inflicted repeatedly at the same point over the course of several rounds, that damage is added together when figuring out how many hull points are lost. The example often given for how this works is the Melf's Acid Arrow spell. The damage from each round is added together when figuring out how many hull points are lost. Other attacks can use this same game mechanic if the DM feels it's appropriate. So maybe giant beavers or space termites are eating your ship. It's Spelljammer, so why not? Anyways, if they're chewing on the same spot round after round, you would add the damage total for each one when figuring out how many hull points are lost, similar to the mechanic we would use for the acid arrow. Now, I'm going to go off on a quick house rule tangent, so just take everything I'm about to say within that context. I prefer to have individual attacks from handheld weapons wielded by size M or smaller creatures not be able to inflict hull points unless the attack roll is a natural 20. This is because in the rules it states that a light ballista isn't powerful enough to inflict hull points when used against a ship. If a small piece of artillery can't do it, your character shooting arrows or throwing rocks or whatever isn't going to fare any better. Now, if a larger creature, like say a hill giant, which is size H, hits your ship with a thrown rock, then yeah, I think it should be able to do hull points. The same with a character hacking away at the same spot on a ship round after round. But this is more akin to the process of cutting down a tree or digging a hole. We aren't tracking individual axe blows or scoops of dirt. What we're looking at is the overall effect over time. Anyways, that's just my opinion. Let's continue. The last item we'll look at under the topic of how hull points work is fire. Fire is especially terrifying in Spelljammer. Remember, this is a game full of wooden spaceships that have limited air supplies, so yeah. Anyways, within the Spelljammer rules, ship fires can be caused by a lot of different sources, like magic, critical hits, Greek fire, or flying through the burning wreckage of someone else's ship that was unfortunate enough to be destroyed by fire. Regardless of what starts the ship on fire, at the beginning of the next round, the ship will take however many hull points of damage it took last round, plus 1. For example, with the fire critical hit, it starts as a 0-point fire. At the beginning of the next round, it does 1 hull point. At the beginning of the round after that, it does 2 hull points, and so on. This is assuming that no one is actively fighting the fire. Each crew member fighting the fire lowers its damage by 1. So if I was to explain this with an example, it would look like this. Our galleon from earlier still has its cannonball damage, so it has 37 out of its total 40 hull points. It passes through a burning debris field and catches fire. Catching fire from burning debris has the same effect as the fire critical hit, so the fire begins as a 0-point fire. At the beginning of the next round, it will become a 1-point fire, and now the ship has 36 hull points. If no one stops the fire, at the beginning of the next round, it will become a 2-point fire, and then the ship will have 34 hull points, and it's all downhill from there. Needless to say, it pays to put out fires as soon as possible. One of the things I don't like about the fire rules is that they don't take materials into account. Fire spreads at the same rate whether your ship is made of thick wood, thin wood, metal, toilet paper, asbestos, whatever. I use the item save for whatever the ship is made of to see if the ship catches on fire and if the fire becomes larger. I know this nerfs the effect of fire a bit, but if we look at the effects of a ship catching on fire has on its air envelope, the nerf looks a bit more justified. I know air quality has nothing to do with hull points, the subject of this video, but the ship catching on fire rules are incomplete without mentioning air envelopes. If a ship loses 10% of its hull points to being on fire, its air quality lowers by 1 level. If you don't know anything about how air quality works in Spelljammer, air quality comes in 3 levels: fresh, fouled, and deadly. This means that if the air on our galleon from earlier is already fouled, it would only have to lose 4 hull points to fire for the air to drop to deadly and possibly kill everyone on board. If a ship loses 40% of its hull points to fire, air quality drops 2 levels. So if the galleon's air was fresh and it took 16 hull points from fire, the air quality would drop to deadly. So my point with this is that even with a saving throw involved, fire can still destroy your ship and kill everyone on board. If you want to learn more about how air quality and air envelopes work in Spelljammer, I have a video for that, and the link is in the end cards and description. So I think that pretty much covers how hull points work in AD&D 2nd Edition Spelljammer setting. I often use hull points to represent the structural value of inanimate objects in game, not just Spelljammer stuff. In that way, I think it's a fairly useful tool. If you have any questions about how any of this works, as always, please ask in the comment section. If you have questions about how critical hits work, I have a video coming out soon that will address that subject, and as soon as it comes out, I'll add the link to it in this video's end cards and description. With that, it's outro time. Thanks for watching! His Holiness the Cat of True Seeing, His Cantaloupe of Knowledge, and I would like to wish you a wonderful rest of your day.